Clear Channel Voice of News Radio.
3, 2.
I'm Deborah Carter, host for Gaining a Voice. In this program, you'll see who the decision makers are and how stories are selected in the mainstream media. This morning, you may have read the newspaper. On your way to work, you may have heard the news on the radio. And tonight, most of you will tune in to a news program. But who decides what is news, and how did those stories become news?
There go. Quick, key. Quick.
I've got it.
Chiron change.
Slim McLeod. Never forget it. Forget it.
Loose key.
Every day, the world and what happens in it is recorded by the news media. And every day, reporters gather information, ask questions, try to make sense of events, governments, business, and people. But what brings reporters to these events? Why are they given these stories? When do they know they are to cover these stories? How much time do they have to prepare? And who gives them these assignments?
Whatever you feel comfortable. What's that my first edit?
A couple things that we're sure are going to happen.
Like one hospital will close.
Like one hospital closed, one will be converted into long-term care. That there's going to be 3 hospitals delivering babies instead of 5. That there's going to be an enhanced of home care to deal with earlier discharge.
We've got 2 things we could do. I mean, I can try and pitch this to page 1, and that would be lovely. And then if you do, in fact, also get a leak or something, then, we're ready for it. Or we can try and treat it as a centerpiece, but we'll have to set up some art for it. Do so.
Yeah. If I do get a leak, it would be hopefully coming tonight after this marathon session.
By about 10:15 in the morning, most of the editors in charge have a good idea of what the reporters are already doing, and we sit down at a meeting and we trade that information. We tell each other what our departments are doing.
Do you know of any sort of news events tomorrow that are coming up, looming at all?
Sharon Kirky has been chipping away at the hospital closings all week. The District Health Council puts its proposals forward on Monday for not just which hospitals get closed, but what other kind of reorganization takes place. Things like some of the emergency departments will probably end up being closed. We're 101% sure that the Grace Hospital will close out of all of this. When the stuff comes out Monday, that won't be the final decision, it'll be the recommendations.
There's a good wire story that we're going to localize on the Canadian casino industry and how big it is and how much it's growing. It's worth about $1 billion in revenue this year, and expected to, the number of casinos actually is expected to double next year, which is amazing.
Transform. Ready, 2, 1, 2, move 2.
So the producer of each individual program sits around with his crew, or his story producers, asks questions about what they think would be an interesting angle to take or an interesting guest to interview, and then they start building their program from there.
Harvard Gould is doing a story today with a very interesting story on the Ontario Attorney General changing the justice system here, how we do business in Ontario. Basically, going to be removing most cases from the court system and putting it into an arbitration system.
I'm asking her to shoot it so that it requires minimum cutting anyway, and an overall package of 3 minutes. But if we've got the truck there, then just bring the tape out and ship it back to us. She can go, finish her day. She doesn't have to come back here for that.
When I first come in the morning, one of our assignment editors, we have 2, one of the assignment editors will tell me where I'm going. We'll talk about the story briefly. It's always a time crunch. We'll sit down, have a brief chat about what's happened lately, because reporters often don't follow the same story from start to finish. So we'll get updated. We have a file that we keep on every topic that we're covering. I go through the file. This morning I jumped in a cab because Paul Wing, the cameraman, was already on another shoot. So I met him here, and in the cab I was reading all of the information to bring me up to speed.
Everything going on tonight is happening at about 6 o'clock, okay, so... Okay, right, I know. We will have to use Kimothy to pick up pictures of Ms. Lapointe. So she's out of the mix at 4 o'clock, and then Kimothy will cover Parizeau Rally. I will check with CTV to make sure that they're just on standby for it. On at the same time, CBE open house.
Art theft. Just before the meeting, had a call from a woman, local artist. For the third time, she's had some of her artwork stolen. This time it was a smash and grab downtown. She's putting out a $1,000 reward for the artwork. Her name is...
That sounds like the advisable maneuver, but how do you get around then the Saskatchewan position of the lawyer saying, I was there from day one, and in fact every provincial health ministry, according to him, had a lawyer there from day one.
Well, being there is different. It has to do with this. It has to do with how you conduct yourself. If, when a hearing begins, the commission says, this is how we're proceeding, then the parties who have standing are advised by their counsel to behave in a certain way.
Okay.
Yes. Obviously, the Red Cross is doing it because it's they're trying to save their hide. But I don't understand the provincial governments in all of this. And I think it'd be interesting to go and talk to either Charlie Harnick, who is Attorney General for Ontario, or somebody provincially who could say why they're fighting Creever.
And we have one story meeting at the beginning of our day where we discuss who's found what potential stories. That takes slightly under an hour. If we get close to an hour, we probably all get tired and want the meeting to end anyway.
Now, Kovalov doesn't speak English, unfortunately, but Mironov does, who we had on 2 days or a day before he was going to go in to this latest hot zone.
And we produce at the end of that meeting a list of suggestions that we've decided are worth chasing for that day. And we know that we're not going to get all those stories. And even the ones we get, we won't get them all on that day. We have a list every day that contains, if all of the stories were to come through that day, we'd have 5 shows.
So what are any thoughts on the part of anybody on stories that we should pursue today or get on the list for later?
I thought there was another angle to look at the internet. There was an interesting story in Wall Street Journal yesterday about how internet has become a victim of its own success. And our building is actually a good microcosm of that. Too many users, not enough lines.
I know we've sort of done this story in one form or another in the past, but I was just intrigued by the number of cars that are getting stolen these days. And it might be a good piece to do. Either, I don't know, to spend some time with, some police, detectives or that are trying to kind of crack one of these car rings or something like that. Or maybe even to look at it from the point of view of the auto industry or the insurance industry.
In our view, a local story becomes a national story when the local issue being explored in the local story has a national resonance, has national relevance. For example, a school cutback in a particular corner of a particular city isn't in itself a national story, but because school cutbacks are occurring all across the country, and there is an interest across the country in how these issues are being dealt with outside of their own locale, then often cutbacks as it relates to government services, as it relates to certain things that are available nationally, these things become of interest to a national audience.
Apparently the Health Council will meet this afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock, open meeting, and the expectation from a couple of the people that he talked to is they may announce today their scenarios, and we think the general will close or the civic will close or whatever. So trying to find out, will that in fact happen today? What time will it happen? And is he the one who's there, or is it an afternoon reporter? Or can we get the information before it's released at the meeting? And if we want to have Rhonda do, she's going to do a stand-up close to her piece, and if you want to do it as a look live, we would have it in-house by 5:15, and it would be, she finishes, max, one question from you, and her answer. That also then means that we're done by 5:30, and our costs are kept to a minimum in terms of overtime.
Well, we go through the day's stories and decide which ones do we think we can get to given the resources that we have today, given our priorities. These are the stories that we're going to chase. Then the stories are assigned to reporters, and the mechanics then take over. You have to call the people. If it's a story where you're starting from ground zero, there's no event, there's no news conference, you're then chasing people and contacting them and seeing when they're available. Then when is a cameraman available? And does that coincide with the availability of the people you want to talk to? Then you go out on the road, you shoot your story, then you come back, the reporter looks at their tape, the reporter sits down, writes their story, and they're assigned an editor, they go into an edit suite and they actually cut the story. And all of that is compressed into an 8-hour period.
You had a good quote earlier you were talking to me about. Remember you
Gary
said,
Cardiff?
yeah, but after the English will emerge a better, cheaper
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
And then
I
you had a
quote
really
from,
nice quote.
Okay, I'll put that back in. It's getting along.
Because what I think that'll do, and maybe Lynn will think differently, but I think that'll just give you a more human ring at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you need. Our own deadlines, stories generally are written and sent to an editor starting about mid-afternoon. Mid-afternoon through into the evening. So that's when stories are beginning to arrive. That's probably not the time you're likely to get a news story into the next day's paper. You want to start earlier than that if you're trying to, to get us to cover an event.
Generally, if I'm looking for stories, I'll look along the briefs column of the paper, something that might have happened very briefly, and see if it needs to be enlarged on. Or I might, I'm reading other papers all the time from the States, from England, from other cities, trying to find out about something that's happening there that may be happening here.
The routine human interest story, the car crashes last night, that sort of thing tend to appear less in the Globe and Mail. We quite consciously do not focus on any one city. Although our circulation is preponderantly in Ontario, the circulation reaches across the country, and we don't have a city hall reporter in any city. So local issues tend to get shorter shrift in the Globe and Mail, no matter what city we're talking about, whether it be Toronto or Montreal or Medicine Hat.
This particular wire here, the national wire, which is mainly Canadian press stories, although there are some stories from other news services, but 95% is probably Canadian press stories. And if there are stories that run on the wire that we feel are newsworthy and of interest to our readers, we will take a copy of this story and it'll be edited and go in the paper the next day.
What's up?
Canadian Presse, Presse Canadienne.
Okay. Saturday calendar off to Ross Hopkins in a few minutes.
We're like a news wholesaler, whereas a newspaper is a product that a consumer can go out and pick up off the street corner. We're a wholesaler that provides information to that newspaper or to a radio or television station as well. Canadian Presse is owned by the roughly 90 newspapers, daily newspapers in Canada that are members of the Canadian Press, and we exchange their news across the country. For example, if we pick up a story from the newspaper in Halifax, our desk in Halifax will rewrite it, put it on the wire, and a newspaper anywhere else in the country is then available to use it if they want. They don't have to. It's their choice. The other stream is staff-generated news, like we do here in Ottawa, where we actually cover beats and staff news conferences and develop our own contacts and try and break stories the same way a conventional newsroom at a newspaper would do.
Most days of the week it's very straightforward. We have what we call the A section, but that's our primary national and international news section, and also where our op-ed pages are located. We have a city life section that's often backed with entertainment. We have a sports section that's usually teamed up with business, and then we have a classified ads section. The reason that we're running in 4 sections and combining things is that it wastes less paper on the production side.
The city section basically is the main news department of the newspaper. It covers all of the significant local events going on, tries to explain them to people. We're also responsible for some of the parliamentary coverage as well. But anything from fires to hospitals, to emergencies, to a blackout, anything that would happen would probably fall to this department to cover.
This is still a very rough version of the story. If I get in closer, you'll see that I haven't written all the heads yet. I'll do that once I get the art. This is also just a very first version of this story. The reporter and an editor are working on it right now. When they're finished, I'll kill out my old one and bring in the final copy.
The Globe and Mail is a national newspaper which covers Toronto as well. The Toronto Sun is a Toronto newspaper with great emphasis on crime and punishment and the day-to-day events of the day. Toronto Star is the paper that tries to cover a broad middle and appeals to a broad segment of the population, and does it obviously successfully because it has done so for a long time, remains the biggest paper in the country. What is that audience? Previously, it was a fairly well-defined, broad, middle and low-middle class audience. Now we find that the division within that broad homogeneous market are quite a few, because Toronto is, according to the United Nations, the most heterogeneous city on the face of this earth. That in turn places great responsibility, great opportunities and great difficulties on newspapers. I mean, how do you cover a broad range of the marketplace which is so segmented at this time? There is the Italian community, which is fairly strong and has a strong sense of identity, as it should. There is the Ukrainian community. There is the Polish community. There is the Jewish community, religiously speaking. There is now an emerging Muslim community, Hindu community, Sikh community.
김일성 대학을 졸업한 여성 엘리트로 북한 권력설 52안에 두는 현실.
To the floor in 10 with 3, 9, 8, 7.
Mudando de modalidade, os Raptors de Toronto ganharam ontem à noite o New Jersey Nets.
In essence, we have 3 daily newscasts. The first one is at 5 p.m. in Portuguese. It's called Telejornal. Then we have one at 8 o'clock in Italian called Studio Aperto. And then one that goes from 9 till 10. It's our only hour-long show. It's in Chinese. It's called Chinese Newsline. The other 2 are half-hour shows, Monday to Friday.
Americans are getting a little more tense about possible terrorist attacks on their people in Bosnia. This has to do with the final sentencing of that sheikh that is being held responsible for the World Trade Center bombing.
咁咧，如果你喺大多士咧，喺多倫多嘅話咧，就只有咧佢。
It's constant interaction. We have found that because our anchors and our reporters and journalists are part of the community, they're often out there in that community. And we find that our talent is very accessible to the audiences. So now with the new technological era, we find that they're leaving a lot of messages specifically to them on their voicemail. And they do so not in English. They give us the feedback in languages other than English.
We feel that one of our mandates and our market niche is really to provide news to the communities that we're trying to serve. So these language communities, not in terms of geographic niche marketing, but in terms of cultural niche marketing. So stories which would be of interest, for example, to the Chinese community would be stories about or from Hong Kong, stories about the community's reality here in Canada.
6, 5, 4.
Newsworld is Canada's only all-news, 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week news channel. It was started by the CBC in partnership with a number of private partners some 6 years ago. We run programming and we run newscasts 24 hours a day. We do newscasts at the top of the clock, and then for the rest of the hour, it's programs.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I am Raphael Benmergui. This is Benmergui Live.
What we're trying to do on our program is, because we want it to be a program that is relating to what people are thinking and saying, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on around us. And that's not necessarily according to what the media says, but it's a sense of what we think is happening.
Should we buy back our debt and stop listening to foreign investors? That's our question. 1-800-481-NEWS. It's a tough one.
Once we've decided on the topic for the day, then one of the producers is assigned to put that program together. And then that producer, with the help of other people, depending on the topic and how big it is and things, that producer will start to make contact with guests and then make decisions on who's going to appear on the program.
The further toward the beginning of the paper that it is, the more important we believe the story to be. If we put a story on page 1, it's because we think it's an important story. If we put it on the front of a section, the city section or the sports section or whatever, it's because we think it's an important story. We want to give it high visibility, we want readers to notice it, and hopefully to react to it.
Can we take a picture of you? Okay.
Chair, I'm going to speak with you first, okay, since you're the visitor.
And her mom was really nice, her dad was really nice.
I've already done the interview, so I'm going to be going back to the station. I'm going to screen my tape, screen my clips, and I'll put my story together. I'll write it all out, and then I'll be cutting it. Get new students in hall today.
Okay, we're running again almost a minute and a half late.
Go with John.
The only reason I'm doing John is because we did a midday thing for him, and now we're trying to do the...
I'm trying to track down, if I can, a closing figure today for Cognos.
Our stories are about a minute 30, tape time plus a 15-second intro. So say 1:45, but I think with a piece like this I might get a little bit more leeway, so I'll have about a minute 30 to maybe a minute 45, plus a 15-second intro. And they tour the area and, I think local attractions.
We can
Will
probably
that
get by
help
with
you
your track, no. We
Yeah?
can probably get by with your track.
You sure?
I'm going to change that shot that I just put in. I'm going to put this walking...
The students from Alberta are taking a lesson out of the classroom in Hull, Quebec. They're learning about culture and commonality.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
It's going to be one of those nights, Jimmy.
Okay. I wanted to hear.
Still framing on camera 3 for the first story, please. We have some camera changes in this segment. Robotics. Who's on robotics? Is it you, Brian?
6.
Roll line 1.
5. 4. 3 to the
Opening the
opening.
sound on.
2. 1.
Stand by to reveal over camera 5.
You know your own market, you know what your market is interested in, you know what your audience is interested in. So that's your starting point. Are we doing stories that we think our audience would be interested in? Are we doing stories that we think our audience should be interested in? And are we doing stories that we think will just make for good television and a good story and useful information?
McLeod will be next, okay?
Okay.
And it's got to be quick. You stand, tell them to go in, okay? There you go, quick.
Key.
Quick.
I've got it.
Chiron
No,
change.
that's Lynn McLeod. Never forget it, forget it.
Loose key.
Good work, good work. Toronto now?
Stand by Chiron, Toronto key.
Back to this item.
Okay. Stand by line 1 sound.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Take it.
Every day, newsrooms everywhere receive hundreds of leads, news releases, phone calls about events, stories, and the lives of well-known people.
We'll have to use
Decisions are made by assignment editors as to which stories will be developed and which reporters will develop those stories.
That's about possible terrorist attacks on
Reporters are assigned,
I do feel safer, but
interviews are given.
I will never feel totally safe.
With luck, cameras don't break down, reporters meet deadlines, video and audio tapes get edited, and we, the public, see, hear, and read the news.
Jim, have you got NC-76?
Swing of things is the end.
Newsrooms are organized to bring you stories in the most efficient manner. Determining which stories will be of interest to the public at any given time is a collective process, and you can be part of this process. This involves knowing how a particular media works and finding who is most likely to bring your story forward. What makes a story a news story? How can you affect the news? How do you contact newsmakers? We'll be looking at these questions in future programs. For Gaining a Voice, I'm Deborah Carter.